So I'm starting that now.
Hello.
Hello. So Francisco, you'll be able to work out with Gail getting this recording to her?
Yeah. So
Thank
I'll share with her the link of the recording, and then the town will be able to post it along with the recordings of the other videos.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
All right.
Life without Keith.
Never thought we'd miss him so much, right?
And Fred, thank you for your comments so early. Those were nice.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. Happy to do it. I just got an extra strong cup of coffee and walking through it.
Well, it's funny.
Yes, it was very helpful. Thank you.
I had budgeted like 3 or 4 hours to go through it, and about an hour and a quarter later, I was done. So it was a lot less painless than I thought it was going to be.
Yes, it was. I didn't go through that fast, but it was better than I feared.
I'd say it's 7 o'clock, Francisco, so we might as well start rolling.
Okay. Do you want to do anything to officially start the meeting other than hand it over to me?
That was the official start of the meeting. Yeah.
Okay. I'll take it.
Great, thank you.
I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, so if you could all mute your mics and then just unmute when you need to speak, it'd help out the audio a little bit. And can you all see my screen? Yes. Good. Okay, well, I'll jump right into things here. So thank you everyone for joining us. We've got a great turnout this evening. I must be, Mondays seem really popular. That's good. Chuck, I'm glad you're able to join us. And moving forward, we'll be doing this on Wednesday evenings instead. I had a conflict this Wednesday, so I couldn't do it. So our agenda this evening is pretty straightforward. I'd like to focus on recent modifications made to the regulations. And by recent, I mean since we met last month. I'd also like to discuss open items. These are items that have yet to be resolved. I have questions for you, and it could be a little bit of work or it could be a lot of work. And then just open it up to any other questions or comments regarding the most recent draft that was shared with you, and we'll close that out by talking about our next steps. All right, where we're at in the process, this has looked the same for a little while now. That's because task 1.5 is really where the meat of the work is in this phase 1. But we do want to get to the next couple of tasks, and I don't think we're too far away. And that would be adoption and some training around with staff how to use the revised regs. So let's jump right into the recent modifications that were made. And I'll go through this in order of in section order, in numerical order here. So we'll start with the first change that was made to the regs since we discussed it last week. And I think many of these we brought to your attention, or last month. I mean, many of these we brought to your attention last month. We talked a little bit about how we should handle it, and then we went back into the document and made those changes. So this should all look fairly familiar to you. On the subject of continuance of a non-conforming use, what we did is we broke up this language into its 2 parts, so the 2 parts of it aren't confused with one another. So there's the top paragraph is what it was before, all one paragraph, all pushed together. And we broke it up in its 2 parts. The first part being essentially stating that non-conforming uses in bulk may be continued, but may not be expanded in gross floor area, height, amount of use, or extent of bulk. And then the second part of this, and this is really what we talked about the most last time, was that buildings that are non-conforming in use or bulk, that are conforming, excuse me. So these are conforming uses, conforming bulk, but they are not conforming with the setback requirement, shall not be permitted to expand floor area within the setback. So we're just pointing to the issue that it's the presence within the setback that is the issue. And we're exempting vertical additions from this. So we're permitting those providing they do not increase floor area within the setback.
Right.
Does that sound okay?
Yes, I think that's what we'd all kicked around and agreed on.
Okay,
Yeah, sounds good.
Makes sense to me.
Good, very good. But let's continue. All right, on the subject of reconstructing, so this, once again, we're still on the subject of non-conforming uses and structures. What this provision allows for, this particular subsection, is that if you have a non-conforming use or structure that's damaged in some sort of disaster, natural or unnatural disaster, basically you have a year to reconstruct it without having to come before the Planning and Zoning Commission for any sort of approval. We did add some details or caveats to that, so that, and that's shown in red. The first item being the Planning and Zoning Commission may provide additional time for restoration not to exceed 2 additional years. The issue here being we didn't say why you may provide additional time or how or what the mechanism for that was. And so here we clarified by adding language, if the owner provides a written statement to the commission regarding delays beyond their control, such as contractor delays or back-ordered materials or supplies.
Good.
Make sense?
It
Just
does.
just one question on that.
Yes.
If I could.
Yep.
Are delays beyond their control limited to just what's there, or would permits by, let's say, federal permits, a federal wetlands permit that might be required, or something, you know, a Title V permit, or something along those lines, that are beyond our control, beyond their control, but they've applied for a federal permit. Would that be included as something beyond their control? Because I could see that happening with like a commercial structure that required, even though it wasn't expanded, a new Title V permit that
Sure.
might take longer, might take considerably longer. So
Okay.
would that be regarded as, in your opinion, as a delay beyond the owner's control?
Yeah, I think that's a very good example. It seems to me that that might be the intent of this provision, and I wonder what everyone else thinks about that.
Well, I think that's fine. I think that the such as are examples, but it does give us the discretion to consider other things.
I agree. I just want to make sure that there's a consensus that language, and I'm glad we're capturing this meeting this way, that the consensus of the group is that another permit by a third party would be considered a delay beyond the control of the owner.
I would say that holds up with me with the common sense check. I am no lawyer.
Well, why can't we just throw in there or other permits beyond the town of Stonington?
Well,
I think we can just all recognize that, you know, permitting, especially at the government level, isn't something that the property owner does have any control over the speed of, provided that they, you know, put in their part in a timely fashion,
Mhm.
you know, that's, you know,
Okay,
Well,
it seems like a reasonable
so
assumption.
it's right there.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm fine. I'm fine with that.
Okay,
Hello, hello, this is Lynn. Can you hear me?
Yes.
we can hear you, Lynn.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, I was on before and it didn't sound like anybody could hear me when you were going through
We did not.
the non-conforming floor area ratio.
Yep.
Can we just go back to that? I'm sorry, guys. I
Sure.
thought people could hear me, but then I realized they couldn't.
Well, you've
Can-
got us now, Lynn. So let's
Okay.
go back. Yep.
So my only question is why would we allow additional height in a non-conforming area? So
Yeah, Keith had informed me that has been the practice for a long time for purpose of allowing like dormers on a house, changes to the roof line, provided there was no living area occupying that area within the non-conforming setback. So we're trying to be consistent with the way this has been applied in the past.
I don't think that's what it says. I don't think it allows vertical additions in the non-conforming area. I think it allows them within the setback. So
It just
Other way-
doesn't
other way
allow
around.
any additions that
Yeah,
alter the
increase.
floor area.
vertical additions that do not increase the gross floor area within the setback may be permitted.
Right, vertical additions to those buildings may be permitted, providing they do not increase. The intent here was to not increase floor area within the setback alone, but you could
Right.
you could provide a vertical addition anywhere to the building, provided
Even in the non-conforming area?
that as it's my understanding that's how it's been interpreted in the past. And I'm realizing now there's still some confusion with the language, with the way it's worded that we need to resolve. But that points to a larger question: is what is the intent, and what would you like to? How would you like this to regulate it?
Well,
I almost think the reverse of this. That I wasn't present for the last discussion, so I feel
Okay,
guilty bringing this up. I had to attend a WPCA meeting and in the same time block as the last meeting when you discussed this, but
sure.
I would think that it's almost the reverse of this, that vertical additions within the setback that don't increase the gross floor area would be permitted. That's less intrusive because you're not increasing the nonconformity, which is generally the way these regulations are written, that nonconformities can't be increased.
right,
Right.
so let's go do an example, Chuck, so we're all on the same page. We have a 10-foot setback and we have a building that is 5 feet from the road. What this says is if that building is just I'm making it up 12 feet tall, they could add another 10 feet in some kind of atrium in the front of that building. So it's within the 5 foot from the road. That's what this is saying.
Right, right. I understand it now. I'm glad you brought this up because I read it too quickly. I thought that we were permitting additions within the setback area with the quick reading of the language, which to me makes more sense. Allowing vertical additions within the setback as opposed to outside of the setback.
Fred, you're muted.
okay. Okay, I'm back. in the last sentence, vertical additions to these buildings may be permitted, providing they do not increase the floor area within the setback, and providing they're within the allowed floor area ratio. In other words, you don't want people going up, I mean, 2-3 stories, say, just to be ridiculous. You want them to, you want that space to still conform to floor area ratio,
Right.
right?
But we don't use a floor area ratio anywhere in the zoning regs.
Okay.
Are you talking about coverage?
Okay, it's covered in A. I'm sorry. It's may not be expanded in gross floor
Gross.
area.
Height.
So that's use or bulk. So here we're talking about a building that is conforming in use and bulk. So it's not more coverage than it's supposed to be. It's the right use. It's within the setback, right? It's not behind, it's partially within the setback.
Yep.
And as I understand from the way Keith relayed this to me, the current practice is now to allow those buildings to go up. So they can add height, they can add roof line, they can add dormers, provided that within the non-conforming section, and if it's non-conforming by 5 feet, the front 5 feet of the structure is non-conforming, provided that no livable area is actually added within that non-conforming area, you can go up in height, but you can't add livable area there.
Right.
So it's
Okay.
intended to allow some flexibility because, you know, if you have to change a roof line, if you're adding to a building in height or story in the conforming area, it may have impacts to the roof line and may require some height to be added in the few feet that are non-conforming. And this is restricting what's developed in that area by prohibiting any livable space within that section of the building that's non-conforming. And that's what it's trying to say. And it's becoming clear to me now that the wording needs to be a lot clearer.
But
That's a very clear explanation. So I would think, and I agree with that. I agree with that.
Okay.
So let's use a Lynn example. If you had a flat roof, 5 feet of which, or low pitched roof, 5 feet of which were in the non-conforming, and you wanted to add a pitched roof to it, but not add living space, you're just adding
Right.
a rain shed, snow shed, that would be allowed.
Correct.
Yeah, so that makes sense to me. Maybe we should have an example, graphic.
okay, but you still cannot exceed your you still can't
Right.
exceed your allowable gross floor area.
Correct.
And that's already in place. So this isn't exempting it from that. And
Got it.
we are once again talking about structures that are in fact conforming with use and bulk. So they're
Got it. Okay.
the only reason they're non-conforming is by virtue of the fact they're not behind the setback.
Right.
So
Got it.
the only thing, I mean, I remember Keith indicated another example would be steps. That's another great example when somebody need to change their steps for some reason. But this is my only question. I have 2 questions here. What if
Yeah.
it was a roof deck? Is that considered living space? Because
Yes.
that's the popular thing now. So is that considered living space, a roof deck? Doesn't have a roof on it. It's just they're changing the, the structure. So now they're going to add, railings, whatever, to make a roof deck. Is that living space? Because what is the definition of living space? I don't think we have that in our definition. I just want to, because here's the thing. These are usually things that are on smaller lots, sometimes more congested neighborhoods, and going up, but being outside and going up serves a different brings up a different issue, which is the whole reason for the setbacks, right? So I just want to bring that up as an example. A roof deck. Is that allowed here? They've got a porch, front porch, it's 5 feet within the setback. Now they just want to change that roof line and they want to make it a roof deck. Is that okay? According to this?
I don't know.
Yes. If it's not covered, then it doesn't count, as I understand the rules. In other words, if it's a deck without a roof over it, and it's not floor area, and it doesn't count.
But would they need a permission, Brad? Would they have to even come to us?
Well, they'd have to come to the planning department, but not to us, I should think.
Right. That's
Okay. Okay, that was, I just do think we have to tweak the wording here a little bit, but I do think the living area and that adds some
Mhm.
clarity there. And maybe some examples, just a couple, examples might be good.
Right. Okay.
And I'm sorry I had made you backtrack there, but I'm glad we talked about it.
I'm glad we talked about it too. It's no problem. Okay, let's go back to where we picked up, and I've noted everything you discussed, so we'll look into it.
okay.
So I did add or permit delays to this, so I think we're providing examples that it's sufficiently broad. And the idea here is that someone's communicating with you, right? There's some level of accountability. You're providing them with some flexibility that they don't have to come before you, but they can't just sit on a project forever without having to come before you or having to communicate with you as a commission.
And that means we presumably have the control to say that explanation doesn't make any sense, and if you can't do better, you're out of luck, right?
Yeah, which doesn't mean you're shutting down their project. It just means they have to come before you with an application.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
Here in the second item, we exempted required changes to the structure as required by building code or FEMA standards from being subject to ADR review. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so if you're doing it for aesthetic purposes or expanding, making any changes because you'd like a slightly different house, you need to have it reviewed by architectural design.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. All right, very good. Next item.
Excuse me, Francisco, could you make your
yes.
screen larger? Make it-
Yeah, let me.
Somehow it shrunk
that.
up on me. I don't know if
How's
anybody-
is that larger?
That's better.
Slightly?
Yeah, that's larger.
Okay, unfortunately with Teams, unlike Zoom, I have the option of making my screen really big and not seeing any of you,
Ah,
or
That might-
making it a little smaller and I could see you. So, we'll go with
okay,
you being able to see the content. How's that?
perfect. That's a little bit better. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so we have someone else joining us, so I'll admit them now. Okay, moving on to parking. We did a little cleanup here. There weren't any big changes. We had parking broken up into thresholds of fewer, pardon the grammar here, fewer than 20 vehicles as
Thank
it
you,
was
thank
before.
you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're absolutely correct.
Makes me crazy.
You're dead on with that. If it's a quantity you can count, then it should be fewer. or 20 or more vehicles, and we had the kind of redundancies across the two. They're both saying the same thing. And we also decided that the way we wanted to regulate parking was that if you were adding 20 or more spaces, you needed to get a special use permit. So we consolidated down into one section. And so what we are now saying is that the expansion of an area of an existing parking lot to accommodate an additional 20 or more vehicles shall require a special use permit.
Perfect.
Okay. That's the only change there. Next.
Oh, so, excuse me for a minute,
Yep,
Francisco.
go back.
Yeah, 5.3.24. You had a pink item on it, highlight.
Oh, yes.
Would you mind, may modify 5.3.24?
Yeah, I
Good
don't
catch.
have that in the presentation. You're looking at the markup then?
Yes, it was the
Okay,
markup,
let me pull that document up so I can see it.
which I've lost in my screen, but I have it in my notes. Technology is wonderful.
5.3.24. Rehabilitation of existing buildings.
And I had just question marked about may modify. I guess the usage of the word may, if you
Right.
want to get more detailed on that.
Are you sure you don't have a slide on that? Wasn't it just the previous slide where it was within a year?
Mm,
No, this
No,
is
that's section 4.4.6.
Oh,
This-
okay.
And I had the question of why that isn't a ZBA problem and not ours.
That's right. You had a question on that, right? Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to that now in my version of the document. Yeah, rehabilitation of existing buildings. So I'm skipping over. My apologies for skipping over this.
That's fine.
This is something I provided a note to myself in the draft document, but I didn't tell you about that. This is something I think we need.
Very shrewd of you.
Yeah. This is something I think we need to address in phase two. And,
Okay.
and so I'll tell you exactly what we're looking at because I realize I don't have it up on the screen. 5.3.24 is the section on rehabilitation of existing buildings, which basically allows the Planning and Zoning Commission to modify any of the zoning regulations to allow for the rehab of an existing building. It's really aimed at older historic buildings, mill buildings. So it kind of gives you carte blanche to rewrite the rules for those projects. And as we have long now discussed, it's very problematic when you give yourself broad discretion in your capacity, your administerial capacity. Where you want to have that broad discretion is in your legislative capacity when you're creating districts, not when you're administering and enforcing the regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, this is problematic. Now, how it is we might address this requires some work on our part. And one idea that I have is you could simply create a floating zone, and it would be you have some districts of this nature, where if you have a project that meets the requirements or the conditions as set forth by the floating zone, that floating zone can be applied as a special district to an individual property that will allow you to work with the property owner to craft the program of the property and to develop the set of regulations that would apply to the property. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, but it gives you flexibility in your legislative capacity in terms of creating zones and approving the adoption of a zone and changing your zoning map. So that's a much better way to approach that. And because this may require some substantive work, I recommend we take that on in phase 2.
Okay.
Francisco, what about what I've seen done in other regulations, and I don't
Yeah.
know what this violates the rule you just said we shouldn't violate, but I'll
Yeah.
raise it anyway, is that the commission does exactly what you said, but they waive certain requirements. And we do waivers all the time. But the commission retains the rights in certain instances where flexibility is required. And your example was a good one.
Mhm.
A historic building and the way they get there is through waiving requirements.
All right. With respect to waiving requirements, what the courts have upheld as you having some authority to waive is mainly submission requirements, whether it be a traffic plan or a particular aspect of the site plan, any other requirements of an application, you have authority to waive.
Mhm.
The courts have not found that you have the authority to waive actual physical zoning requirements, whether that be coverage, setback, height, uses allowed. The courts have found that you don't have that authority to waive those standards.
I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that lots of towns have written into the regulations that within particular zones, Town of Windsor is one that does it. They retain the authority to waive setback requirements. I realize that's within the province of the ZBA statute, but it's done frequently within. I cited Windsor as one town that does within the NZ zone, their neighborhood zone, and it's principally NZ is principally government and academic facilities are zoned NZ.
Right.
So it applies in that case. But why don't you give it some thought? That may be another vehicle, that would get us around creating a spot zone.
That is a problematic practice, the waiver of requirements, because it can be applied unequally. And it's something that I think makes the town subject to litigation. And I realize it's a practice that's held by a lot of towns. A lot of towns also have ZBAs that overreach in terms of their authority to grant variances well beyond any sort of hardship variance. And that's another way of handling things. They send it to ZBA and they just give them a variance because it's a good project, the town's in favor of it. The ZBA doesn't have that authority either. Unless it's an established hardship being a condition that's unique to the property that makes it very difficult for them to comply with the regulations. We don't, I don't think we need to cover this ground yet, because I do think it requires us to do a lot of work in this area. And we have a phase 2 that's intended for exactly that.
All right, and how about the next page, page 35?
Yeah.
Francisco, is that still phase 2? It's the continuation of 5.3.26, residential mixed use. You have three comments on that page. Did you want to skip those till phase 2?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't
Yeah.
clear on that. Okay. So
Yeah.
we should jump back to your slide presentation. Sorry.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Last month, we talked about the fact that right now, because of how your setback requirements are applied, and they're applied to every facet of a building, including steps and ramps, they have to be behind the setback. That a person has to come in for a request a waiver or a special accommodation to allow for the construction of a handicap accessible ramp or a ramp to assist someone that has medical issues. And that just presents an extra amount of work that someone has to go through in order to put a ramp in that they might need in a very near-term scenario. So what we did is we created a new section called accessible ramps. And we outlined it as such. The first item, accessible ramps added to an existing building to provide access as required by the ADA or as required to meet the needs of a mobility impaired user shall be permitted within required yards. So outright permitted, they don't have to pull a zoning permit for it. They're just permitted to construct it. And if it's an item that requires a building permit, they pull a building permit for it.
Okay.
A question, Francisco, would a better
Yep.
term be setbacks rather than yards? Or are we okay there?
We use the two interchangeably, required yard and setback.
Okay. All right. That's fine.
The next part of it stipulates that if it is built in association with new construction or in addition to a building, it shall not be located in a required yard.
Okay. Should we put setback in parentheses after yards, just so everybody's clear that it's one and the same?
Not if the definition works.
Okay.
It's just that one is plural in A, yards is plural, and in
Yeah.
B, it's singular. You might want to make it consistent.
Well, look at the construction of the sentence. It's fine.
Okay, I'll review the document for consistency with the term required yard versus setback.
Okay.
Just to
thank
make
you.
sure we're using the two
Yeah.
consistently. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. Next item. And we talked about how this statement or this subsection was problematic because the prior language was shall. And we had some concerns about this being a really broad statement. How do you enforce it? With respect to Public Act 2129, they're discouraging us from pointing to character as a reason to deny applications in character alone without substantiating that in detail.
Right.
However, I think we agreed that the idea of this is okay, and that what we're trying to do is provide guidance to applicants, property owners, and developers as to what the expectation is, realizing that we can't use it as a basis to deny an application. So by changing from shall to should, we really remove your ability to use this as a reason for denial because it's advisory and not compulsory, and it still communicates what the intent is.
It's worded a little awkwardly, and I wonder if better way would be structures or alterations should not detract, rather than no structure should. But that's picky.
Anyone else have thoughts on that?
This is Ryan. Yeah, I agree with Fred. I think kind of rewording it in the manner that, say a structural alteration should not detract would be a lot clearer.
I think I agree also.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
much better language.
Okay, very good.
Yep.
Thank you.
What does residential nature mean in this instance?
Well, I didn't originally craft this, so I can only interpret it to mean that if a development is occurring in a neighborhood, it should look like a residential development. It should look like, it should be complementary to the residential buildings that surround it.
Would it work to strike the word residential so it should not detract from the nature or predominant style of the neighborhood?
I don't know. What does everyone think about that?
That's interesting.
I mean, it gets you there, I think.
Maybe just read, that's a good question on what does residential nature mean? I think it could mean lots of things to different people, just from the predominant style of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Would you keep residential in the title for the section?
That was going to be my question, Andy. Yeah.
Well, are we talking about commercial zones? I don't think so.
It's a suggestion about neighborhoods. I guess if there's any question about it, I would just strike residential in both instances.
So in the past, when we've had conversations about whether it, a new structure or redesign, adheres to the, the
Character.
surrounding area. It's been you mainly, I have to tell you, mainly in commercial. So, we had a big discussion about it with the boutique hotel that was replacing the gas station in downtown Mystic. We had a big discussion about it on Cottrell Street for the building next to the Whalers Inn. We had a discussion about it when Bravo was built. So it's not. I don't remember any discussions where it's been focused on residential, meaning just residential neighborhood. I mean,
I'm just not sure that the whole section is all that important, given that it's completely toothless. It's just a well wish within the regulations.
I think we're trying to say something in here that we can't say.
Exactly.
We've
Exactly.
skillfully avoided the word character.
Well,
But that would be a better word beyond, the residential character or predominant style of the neighborhood. So we're trying to say something we're really not supposed to say.
So why should we say anything? Yeah.
But I think Chuck, what we changed was shall to should. So, what nobody said we couldn't use the word character. It's we're just, it's not as it doesn't enforce anything. It's just
No, I don't think we're supposed to deny something because it doesn't meet the residential, it doesn't comport to the residential character of the neighborhood. You can't do that. And that's really what we're trying to say. So you can't deny something because it doesn't conform to the character.
Predominant,
And we're
predominant style of the neighborhood. Yeah.
We're essentially, I think, giving someone an argument that, if we put this in our regulations and we raise questions about it during a hearing, and then we deny it based on traffic, did we engage in an hour and a half long discussion about architectural style, a 5-minute discussion on traffic, deny it for traffic, and we really felt that it detracted from the residential character of the neighborhood? you just have to be careful with this. I think that we could actually be hurting ourselves with this one section, but I also understand why you want to do it. You know, you wouldn't want something that is you know, just doesn't fit the residential character. You know?
Right.
So it's,
Right.
it's
Well, let me ask you this, doesn't the
double-edged sword.
architectural review board, so if it's in a commercial zone, it goes to the architectural review board. But if it's in a commercial zone, or excuse me, a residential zone, it does not go to the architectural review board, correct? So that's why I think, now that I'm thinking about that, is that why the word residential is in here? Because if it was in commercial, it goes to the architectural review board, and they debate it and comment on it under their purview, which
Mhm.
I do think that they are kind of thinking about what else is around that in that area. So is that why we've left it in instead of striking it entirely? Because the architectural review board does not, comment on residential? Is that why?
I don't know.
Okay. I don't know. I wasn't here for the meeting when you discussed that, but you know, I can see why it's there, you know, to try to create some control over architectural style. But as Francisco said, you can't use it to deny something. So I think it's dangerous to raise it. I I I can understand why you would want to leave it in, but I think it's precariously perched within the regulations. I think it could cause us trouble.
I'm with Chuck on that.
If we took it out, if we left it out and then had a discussion about Bravo, are we off the reservation? Or any home for that matter? I mean, does it prohibit us from discussing style?
As Lynn says, I think after someone in a commercial zone goes through design review, we generally try to respect the fact that anything we do to a design after the architectural review board is kind of like double jeopardy. That is staffed by architects. So I think we respect that. We generally try not to make spot connections because none of us are architects. But she also points out, and I think in a very good way, is that residential structures don't go through that type of review. So should there be some kind of a design review process for residential? Generally, design review by towns is handled outside of the zoning regulations as a design review. And there are some towns that require that residences be reviewed in design review. And there's a separate process. It's usually administered by the staff.
Right, but this little gem wouldn't give the town planner any real tooth to reject a house that was submitted, a design. So I think we should strike it.
Let me just ask you this. The architectural review board, because I do think that's kind of central to this conversation. Where do they get their guidance from?
Is it an ordinance?
Really? Because lots of times they change color. They change. I mean, I don't know.
Do they have any authority? I mean,
I didn't think they did.
they do not.
Right, they advise, and much of their guidance comes from their professional expertise, which is why you have a requirement that they generally have a design background. You have a certain composition to
Right.
that board.
Okay,
Right.
so
They bring their professional judgment to the work, and it's advisory.
Right,
So
yeah,
should we
okay.
suggest that they take up residential as well and get rid of this altogether?
I think so.
Yeah,
Well,
I'd agree to get rid of
You
this.
know, there are in recent years, especially in the smaller coastal neighborhoods, there have been a lot of controversy on some of the residential designs.
You bet.
I'm trying to be very diplomatic.
It's okay, Lynn, go ahead.
And it has caused issues. But again, I don't necessarily know what this means unless you had somebody come from outside the community wanting to wanting to build a house, and they read our regs and they were going to put up an ice cube and in a neighborhood that all the homes are 200 years old. I'm making it up here. And they read this and they said, oh, we can't do that. Look, there's a line there. We can't do that. They don't ask anybody. They just say, we can't do that. I don't know. I mean, there have been issues. I'm just trying to point out that there have been issues in residential neighborhoods that,
But
I'm not
that,
sure
but
the architectural review board is even going to want to deal with this because they didn't want to look at ADUs. So why would they want all residential?
that's true. That's a lot of work. Good point. That's a good point, Andy.
Yeah.
and we don't look at many houses,
No,
Yeah.
It's true.
so I really don't think we need to have
I-
this in there.
so
Should we
that
put it-
means you can do what you want with a residence, right?
Yeah, and that's what I think is one of the interesting things about a residential neighborhood is every generation or two, it has a different house flavor to it. That's what makes it a neighborhood, to my mind. Should we,
Okay.
would you like to vote on this, or I don't know how you want to proceed?
We have a majority in agreement that we should just strike this.
I would vote for taking it out.
Yeah,
I don't
I
think
would
they
vote
can.
for taking it out.
I'll
Okay.
vote in favor of that.
I agree. It doesn't do much for us. It's only going to get
Very
us
well.
in trouble.
But I might just bring it up in conversation when we have an application, if it comes up.
All right.
You can be sure the neighbors will.
All right.
Right. Yeah.
When the igloo is proposed next door, Lynn?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Thank you for working through it. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience,
No,
Francisco.
no problem. That's what we're here for. That's exactly what
moving
we're
right
here
along.
for. Okay, next. This just involved us moving things around. You had some redundancy and duplicity in your bond requirements, restating the same information in a couple different places.
Right.
Excavation and filling, and in the site plan requirements. So we still make reference in those specific sections as to what is required, the type of bond that is required. But all of the stipulations and the details of what's required, we put in one place called bonds. And we reference to that section.
Nice.
Okay.
I thought it was good.
Makes more sense.
All right, good. Next is parking. We believe we all agreed that the updated parking figures that we provided and the graphics in particular were helpful. So we went ahead and included those within the revised regs.
Excuse me, Chuck, have you had a chance to study this one?
I have, and I think
Okay.
it's a great idea. Everybody has a
Good.
different interpretation, particularly of angled parking and aisle widths for 90-degree parking. So this is very good. Clarifies a huge question. It's a nice
Agreed.
graph.
Gonna be able to get that Raptor in and out of these parking places?
Easy on the route.
Sorry.
No,
It'll work for even the big vehicles. Okay, very good. Next, so that concludes the revisions we've made in the past month.
Francisco, I have one question
Yes.
about that. So last meeting, didn't we talk about parking lots where you put electric charging stations?
We did.
Okay, so and we all said at that time that because parking lots are not in setbacks, and we would add something that the electrical charging stations would not have to be in the setbacks for existing parking lots. I think we said something like that. My question to you, after talking to several people
Yep.
about electrical charging stations, is that they're changing them, and that now they're also going to be advertising stations. Like you know, because this is a great opportunity, somebody standing there or whatever for 20 minutes getting their car charged, and they're now going to start, you know, putting screens on them, expanding the screens. They're different. The charging stations that we're going to be seeing are very different from like the ones at Marshall's right now over in London. So I just that worries me, right? That they can then be close to the streets, etc. I don't know what others feel about that. I didn't know all this was happening in the world of charging stations, but I guess this is a big deal.
Well,
Thank you.
gas pumps have music and screens on them that drive me nuts.
Right.
Yeah, but these are different. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
thank
a
you
gas
for
pump is
calling
not-
attention to this. And it may be that we're talking about two separate things, or it may be that you're pointing to, you know, something that could be a problem in the future. So I appreciate you bringing it up. And I think we should, in light of your concerns, I think we should directly address that by stipulating that no parking, no charging station located within a setback or required yard, whatever our terminology is going to be, shall have advertising signage or content.
Displays, yeah.
Or
Yeah.
displays, yeah.
I use the word display because that's what, yeah.
Yeah.
Can
That's
we
good.
go back and fix gas stations too?
Yeah.
I
Well, I'm
find it-
electric now, so I don't go there anymore, so that's fine.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But now you got to go to charging stations, right?
I go in my garage.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for calling attention to that, Lynn.
Sure. I find charging stations, the whole thing, very interesting, the wave of the future and everything. So I looked into it a little bit. It's very interesting what people plan to do. So, okay.
Very good.
Rabbits.
All right, open items. We have, I've got about, I don't know, dozen or so slides for you. So let's pace ourselves here. Rabbits, any more thought? They remain a prohibited use. Any more thoughts on allowing rabbits? Now, this prohibits operations involving rabbits. So we're not necessarily prohibiting someone from having a bunny in their backyard through this particular restriction.
I really feel pretty strongly at this point that this item, number 3, was intended to prohibit raising any animals for fur.
Right.
I don't think that it is about keeping rabbits for non-fur reasons. Just
What about pig fur?
I mean, I'm not aware of the market, but I think that's got to be what's going on. It seems to be just the fur-bearing animals. I mean, that would include everything except for birds and reptiles.
But it doesn't say for the purpose of their fur. It just says.
Well, they're bearing it.
Well, I know they are. You know, I thought this was the silliest discussion we've ever had. And my suggestion was to invite the applicant come back and give him permission to raise his rabbits. Rather than make him wait 2 years or however long the rest of this is going to take.
I'm for striking rabbits from this sentence.
Well, that's exactly right, but we need somebody to, I mean, we had an application that would have done that, right?
Correct. Well,
And we turned it down and we said, wait for the new regs.
right, that's what we're doing.
And, you know, you saw the headlines in the paper the next day where everybody was mad at us for, you know,
For 10 seconds.
driving
Yeah.
this poor guy out of town over something like that. I don't know, you know, but that's my thought on rabbits is the same as yours, Ben. Take it out.
But yeah, I mean, he shot himself in the foot, I think, by not showing up to the first hearing because he thought it was a slam dunk. And then the second one, he was on the road and called in with awkward communication.
It was a lousy presentation. I agree.
Yeah. So moving right along, I think we can say we're working on it, and here we are working on it. We'll strike it, and when these go to town vote, he can open up his rabbit.
Can we can't make this change in phase one without an application, can we? It's entirely, we have the authority to make this change right now by removing rabbits.
I'm for it.
Do it.
I'm for
I'm for it.
Me too.
Sounds good.
You're all ready to take a bite out of this carrot?
Yeah.
Can
my
I
lucky
just
foot.
say, is the thing that you don't want fur-bearing animals? Is that it? Or I'm just why can't we say for keeping, breeding, and raising of animals for fur-bearing purposes? Period.
I think that would be a great change to it because it's really confusing otherwise, and we're gonna hear about pigs if
That
we
works for
decide
me.
to interpret this way.
Yeah, I think that's a clearer way of stating it.
Yeah, good idea.
Okay.
But then let me just say, I'm playing devil's advocate, and I realize it. Pigs, if somebody had 5 pigs, I mean, that's agriculture, right? I mean, you can't have 5 pigs. They're not using them for fur, they're using them for meat. So pigs is meat. I'm just not 100% sure why pigs are in there at all. Isn't that a farm animal? I mean, I guess I don't know.
I thought pigs were mentioned elsewhere in the agricultural section about numbers.
I think they're in there because there's a breed with some really nice hair.
Foot.
I'm
It's a
convinced.
foot. They're after their feet. I don't know. For food or fur. I don't know.
I mean, wouldn't what governs cows then governs pigs, or no?
So what your agricultural regulations allow for is the keeping and breeding of livestock.
That's what it was. Okay.
And livestock typically is inclusive of pigs unless you specifically prohibit pigs through this section. So but if we get rid of pigs here, you're then allowing pigs, the keeping of pigs as part of your agricultural practices, which is clearly not currently allowed.
Okay, wait a minute. So are you telling me that no one in the town of Stonington on a farm can be raising pigs?
Not according to your zoning regulations, no.
Well, we know that's not, I mean, we know people have pigs. I mean,
Yeah, the former chairman.
so
This right here, this says no,
Let's cuff him. Let's cuff him and put him in jail.
Well,
right?
one of them was in my freezer at one point.
I liked Lynn's suggestion of just changing this section to say the keeping,
bearing.
breeding, and raising of animals for fur.
Yep,
Okay,
that's prohibited.
Right.
yeah, prohibit raising of animals for fur, keeping, breeding, and raising for fur.
Yeah.
But Francisco, you're saying pigs are not mentioned, excluded in the livestock section. I thought they were, so they're not. I don't
No,
know.
this is the only place where they are excluded.
Oh, okay, I thought they were somewhere else also.
Not
Are
in
we
our
good?
revised draft. Let me search. There's one mention of pigs in your existing regulations, and it is only this section, and there is
Oh.
no other mention of pigs.
Okay, same with rabbits, so, all right.
So that means if we take this out and we say no keeping, breeding, or raising of animals for fur-bearing purposes, that means that if you had a farm, you could have a pig.
That's how I
Correct.
would interpret it, yep.
This is the only prohibition, correct?
Okay, yeah, let's,
And that's allowed by virtue of the fact that in agriculture, we allow for the keeping and breeding of livestock, and a pig is a type of livestock.
Okay.
How about rodents? They're not raised for fur, as far as I know, or for any. I mean, I'm not
Is that a legitimate concern that someone's
Either-
going to start some sort of rodent farm
well, I don't
like-
know.
for like providing laboratories with mice and rats or something of that nature?
there used to be one in
You could-
Ledyard.
Yeah, you could just say on 4, you could say primates and rodents for commercial or laboratory purposes.
Could do that.
That's a big I hate to say it, but it's a big market. You know,
Okay,
I don't know in this area, but there's, you know, specialty rodents for scientific studies is big.
Pfizer had a big farm up in Ledyard. I knew the guy who lived next door to it,
Yeah.
raising rabbits and mice.
Yep.
Okay.
Big
So
farm.
maybe we should say, or raising animals for commercial or laboratory. No, we can't say
well, we
that.
can't say commercial.
No, you
Yeah.
can't say that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so rodents and primates for laboratory or commercial purposes, right?
Right,
Okay, I
Great,
got
thank
it.
you.
I'll
Good.
come
we
back
got-
to you next time with new language on this, which
Moving right along.
I think we talked through it.
Yeah,
All right, regarding the maintenance of non-conforming uses in bulk. So this is how it currently reads, as we currently have it. And my questions are, what type of permit? It makes reference to a permit. Is it a zoning permit? Do applicants pull a zoning permit for this type of work? Does the building department require a zoning permit before issuing a building permit? So what exactly are we talking about with this reference to permit for maintenance?
Well, my thought was that nobody asks for a permit for maintenance, normal maintenance and repair, and certainly not for interior alterations. I mean, I can't imagine that people do that.
I think they do it on a commercial building. Like if they're changing, I don't know, because part of the application is how, I don't know, how the kitchen is made or something in a restaurant.
So
Do
did
If they make it into a bar, like a big bar or something, don't they have to come back?
So
Big
if
Y-
it's a trade that involves a plumber, an electrician, HVAC, those folks are required to pull building permits.
right.
The question is that what we're talking about? Or are we saying that a zoning permit is first needed in order to pull that building permit?
I'd ask Candy on this one. I don't know.
Because the zoning enforcement officer doesn't issue building permits.
Correct.
Well, let me put it this way. Let's say maybe this is a protective thing and somebody went ahead and got a building permit and hired all these people and then they couldn't get the zoning permit if that's what's necessary and they spent all this money. So maybe it's there because if they need the zoning permit and they have to have that first, it would prevent them from making an investment that has to be that's put to a halt for some reason.
Along those lines, I think this is kind of a preventative measure to make sure that improvements don't go beyond the realm of minor repair
Right.
and into the realm of additions and
A new building.
substantial improvements
But don't
to
we
something
catch
that's non-conforming.
Mhm.
Don't
Right.
we catch it someplace else? I mean,
But it seems to me, and I don't know how your building department works, that if someone comes in for a building permit for something like an addition, and it's the house is on the records as being non-conforming in some way, that might get kicked back over to planning and zoning for their sign off first. But I don't know how that practice works.
I guess I would ask Candy Palmer, the zoning enforcement
Okay.
officer,
Yeah, I can follow up with her. Yeah.
for this one,
Okay. All right. So let me do that and I'll come back to you.
out of my league.
All right. Let's move on.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. And this section goes on. I just stopped at what I wanted to talk about. There's E, F, G, et cetera.
Right.
Do we want to continue to require a standalone building for these facilities? And this has come up in the past and we have yet to agree upon as how to handle it.
I don't think so.
I don't either.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we need to require that.
I mean, we have one that we just approved one
Right.
that was not a standalone
Right.
building.
Right.
So-
Right. But on that score, I thought these two things should be separated because
The
we
title,
called training a personal service as opposed to, just cooping up a bunch of dogs someplace. And which is how we allowed it to be where it is.
right.
So I'm not sure that we shouldn't separate dog daycare and dog training.
With their own separate
Yeah.
parameters.
I mean, most of the requirements would be the same, I suppose, but not all of them.
Mhm.
I think where we left this was that, and because we talked about this quite a bit, it was that we would take another look at this in phase 2.
Okay.
So the question is, the standalone building, is that also something we should just sit on until we have a broader discussion about this whole category?
I vote pull it now.
I would too.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Okay.
agreed.
Sure.
Okay, good. Thank you. Residential mixed use.
5.3.26.
We had Fred asked a question about, do we need to be more specific about what floor commercial development is permitted on within a residential mixed use development?
Mhm.
And this is a long section, so I spanned 2 slides here. So there's another item G down here. We, we do have a lot of specifications here about, well, this is a new one that we added. This is not in your existing regulations, that with the exception of lobbies and entrances, sorry about that, to rear or upper floor dwelling units, the street facing first floor shall be limited to commercial uses. So we're reserving commercial use space along the street front. Outside of that, we're not explicit about exactly where that commercial development should be in the building, other than residential units need to be above it. And do we need to be more specific, or is this okay as it is? And here's the second half of it. It's just the process here regarding a special use permit.
In retrospect, I think it's okay.
Me too.
Agreed.
It does allow some flexibility. I think one of the more important components is that it requires residential development to be above commercial uses, so
Right.
that you don't end up in a scenario with heavy commercial traffic and foot traffic and noise above a residential use.
Right.
I mean, one wouldn't think you'd have to even specify that, but
Yeah, right.
but okay.
So you wouldn't want a dance studio over your living room.
Exactly. Right. Okay,
Okay.
so okay is this?
Yes, I agree.
All right.
Yeah.
Very good. Next, and this connects to a larger conversation about expansion versus intensification. And so we'll start it out by discussing the threshold for a special use permit requirement. And currently, that includes a change of ownership can trigger the requirement that someone comes in for a special use permit for a new restaurant, liquor sales place if it changes ownership.
Yep.
And should we continue to require that process to unfold by requiring a permit be pulled again?
I think so.
Well, it does say if it will reasonably result in an expansion of use, which I now that I see it, I'm reading a little more carefully.
Yeah.
So maybe
I think so, because lots
I
of
think we keep
times we talk about hours of operation.
Live music. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So if you change ownership of a restaurant and that's all you do, you don't need a special use permit for that. It's
Right.
when it results in an expansion of use, and and then we get chasing our tail about what that means. But
Yes, that's the next part of this discussion.
and I think that second sentence is fine. It's not
Okay.
doesn't limit it to that, but it certainly gets you to most of the things that you'd be concerned about.
Right.
So what we're really talking about is requiring a special use permit for the expansion and, by the sounds of it, also intensification
Correct.
of a restaurant or liquor sales place. So it doesn't necessarily need to be tied to a change in ownership, does it? If you are the same owner and you expand by increasing seats, expanding, I don't know, your hours of operation, the nature of your business, would that also requires a special use permit to be pulled?
Yes.
Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yes, it
Yeah.
should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
we've
had
done
one
that
just,
before.
we had one last month like that. Yep.
Mhm,
He was increasing his seating, but not his parking or whatever he was doing. The
Mhm.
pizza place up in
Mhm.
95.
Yeah. So, but can we, although we often discuss hours in our, when we have a business come forward, is that something, like, we never put anything in here regarding that?
But we often stipulate.
We often stipulate, so if the old permit of use had, I don't know, said 10 to
Set up.
5, Monday through Friday, Saturday, and the change in ownership said, well, I'm gonna do 10 to 7, they have to come back.
Yes.
Is that on the special use permit that they get?
Should be, shouldn't it?
I don't know.
If you're expanding I mean, that's pretty, that's
Okay,
pretty
I
minor.
found this on the web for if you're expanding the, check it out.
Maybe we
Someone
want,
Siri, volunteer.
I know, I don't know what that would, I don't have
I don't know
Siri,
what that, I think we got bombed.
or
Us
Alexa or something.
living in an AI world now.
Francesca, didn't you say expansion or intensification? Maybe just putting
Yeah,
that.
so I want to talk about it. Let's forget about this for a moment, because I think this does what it is that you want it to do. Whether or not it really we need to say change in ownership, or we should just be talking about expansion as another thing. I don't necessarily think this is problematic, but I do think we need to have a discussion about expansion versus intensification, because they're not the same thing.
Right.
And right now you have an all-encompassing view of expansion, which includes intensification. So let me jump ahead to a slide that picks up on this. Let me find it. There we are. Expansions. And any expansion of a use listed in these regulations as a special use permit shall require submission of an application for the new portion of the development project. So here we have two standards. I want to understand what it is that you mean by expansions, because we use that same word with respect to restaurants, and we use that, in terms of expansion, if they're physically expanding, but we also talk about intensifying, which is more seating, longer hours, more activity, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think associating it with physical enlargements is not correct. I mean,
Not necessarily,
if
yeah.
you can have an expansion of use that has little or nothing to do with the physical plant. So it seems to me that that's too narrow.
Okay. Now, so let me talk a little bit about intensifications.
Yeah.
Because the way expansions are currently being applied with respect to restaurants is inclusive of intensifications. And the way the courts have distinguished between the two is they've generally found that intensifications are not considered expansions if the current use is the same or comparable in nature and purpose of the original use, and there's no substantial difference in effect upon the neighborhood resulting from differences in the activities conducted on the property.
Okay.
Right.
Mhm.
So
That sounds right.
Yep.
So I think we need to be very intentional with our use of expansions, and I think it may require us to add the terminology intensification to that restaurant section. Because when you're talking about adding seating and extending hours, maybe providing more service within the same space, you're really talking about intensifying that existing use. It's a restaurant. It's just a restaurant that's seating 5 or 10% more people now because of its seating arrangement or the way they're serving food. But they're not expanding to a different use. It's not a restaurant that's now also becoming a performance venue, and it's not a restaurant that's expanding in size. So you're also talking about intensification.
But you've got the caveat that there's no substantial difference in effect on the neighborhood resulting from the differences in the activities, which seems to me,
Yeah.
If you've got it gets silly here, if you've got a 50-seat restaurant and you make it a 100-seat restaurant,
Right.
That's more than an intensification, it seems to me, because you're going to have a big effect on everybody else around you.
Right.
Could have, probably will have.
Okay. So what I would like for us to do, and I'm going to go back to restaurants because I think this is mainly applicable to restaurants, is us to just agree upon exactly what we mean and to make sure we get the wording of this clear. Because I don't think it's necessarily reasonable that if someone's adding 10 seats to a restaurant, that they necessarily have to come before you to pull a special use permit, if in fact that really has no bearing on the neighborhood surrounding it.
But who judges that? I mean, does the restaurateur decide 10 more seats won't affect the neighborhood? That's bound to be a problem. And this expansion versus intensification is applicable to far more than restaurants.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And so I think I like that definition of intensification without having a good definition of expansion. And so I think we need to try to find a good definition of expansion and see if we can make that distinction. Because it's a source of confusion and frankly, a source of loopholes.
Right.
All the time.
Yep.
Okay. And it is the way this is currently being applied, does it work? Is it working for you, this regulation?
The one we're looking at right now?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Oh, this one.
Regarding restaurants.
I think so.
Section A is.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Section B is something else, but
Yeah, I have the whole section here for reference, but we're talking about A.
yep,
A works for me.
yep, I agree.
Yeah, for restaurants.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree with that.
Agreed.
Okay. So what I'm suggesting is that we might want to be a little more descriptive here to emphasize any change in number of seats that would adversely impact the neighborhood. And we should make some sort of reference to our concern about the impact outside of the restaurant. What I see problematic about this is it just suggests that if you're adding a handful of seats, the applicant has to go through a special use permit process again, which is it's an incredibly
Excuse me.
comprehensive, extensive, and in some ways costly process to go through for adding a few seats, when our real concern is that the new operation will be really expanded or intensified and be adversely impact to the surrounding neighborhood, overflow the parking lot, whatever it may be.
So,
Well, Francisco, the reason in the past, Mystic is really exploded with restaurants, and
Yeah,
every restaurant owner, most of them are honest, but some of them like to get away with push the envelope as much as they possibly can.
sure.
So that's why I think my hesitation to make them come in for a special use permit for adding more seats is justified.
and
And
let us decide if 10 seats is fine and 50 is not.
Is there a way that we could require them to come in for expansions of, say, over 5 seats for a review without going through the whole special permit application?
I would keep it a real low number if we did
Right.
go that route. Yes.
But that way we would at least, hear about it and have the chance to, have this talk with them.
Or the town planner gets nervous and kicks it up to us.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think Francisco has a good point about the special use permit being burdensome for,
Agreed.
not everywhere is Bravo
Agreed.
Bravo. So, some little restaurants might like to add 5 seats, have the parking lot for it, and can't because they can't afford to do a special permit.
Yeah. So what would that magic number be?
I think 5 is a good one.
You like 5?
I
Or
like
it could be a percentage, or it could be a
We
percentage.
have restaurants that have only 5 seats. Look at Nana.
So
So you gotta be
percentage.
careful with an absolute number. And a
Yeah.
percent is difficult because, you pick something like R36, which has, I don't know, well over 100 seats. And that's going to be a parking issue. So that's why I think you just got to say it is what it is.
Yeah, I think the small fixed number makes sense because parking is the chief concern with how this could impact a neighborhood. And I feel like 5 cars is about the point where you start to notice these things, right?
It depends what street it's on. Look at no, I mean look at the little restaurant that we just permitted across the street from Seaswell there. In that it's in a residential on a residential street, and they have 2 parking spaces, and the whole thing was about not parking on this little dead end residential street. So I mean, isn't there a way that, because sometimes people come in and they waive all the other requirements. I mean, I don't understand why they couldn't go and talk to the planner and say, I needed to extend my special use permit, but nothing else has changed, so I want to waive all the requirements, whatever costly requirements there were.
Well, maybe what we should simply say is that requires review by the staff. And the staff has some authority and in that case, it can be no increase in seats. Because a lot of these plans are reviewed by the fire marshal, by the town engineer, and other officials. And you simply can't squeeze any more seats in and be compliant with the egress code. So I think that if there's any change, it should have a staff review. And if it returns to us because it's something that's a substantive change in use, then the staff can refer it to us. Then you're not forcing people to go back through the process without some at least initial review. It is a cumbersome process. Most people hire lawyers. It becomes very expensive, and I don't think if the way this is written, if it requires a staff review, it would be viewed as an onerous regulation. I think if any increase in a seat requires a renewal of the special permit, I think that would be viewed as very onerous.
Which is exactly what this states right
Right.
now.
That's what we're trying to
Right.
figure out.
So what
Yeah.
I'm saying is that this, instead of requiring a new special permit use, should be a review by the staff and referral to the commission if it's viewed as a substantive change. Now, I realize substantive change is not exactly a scientific term of art, or maybe it is a term of art.
Right. Okay, I have your input. I have the much needed perspective I needed on how to approach this.
Okay.
Let me see what I can do with it. And I'll come back to you with a proposal as how to handle it. Okay.
Okay.
Next, comment from Fred as to what's a green roof, and it's a very good question because we do not have it defined currently in the regulations, and it probably should be defined. So how about this for a definition?
Works for me.
Yeah, I think it covers it.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, I like it too.
Yep.
Okay. Next, compliance with existing excavation regulations. This is just a little housekeeping here. The statement, the sentence I struck right there was very important to the regulations for the 3 months from after they were adopted in 1976. And since February of 1977, it's been dead weight in the regulations. So
Take it out.
Take it out.
okay.
Remove it.
Scalpel.
All right, very good. Very good. This is something Keith and staff pointed out as they felt was a fairly stringent or small allowance for signage. They had suggested potentially increasing this to 24 square feet, which is exactly the size of a sheet of plywood. Wonder, or actually, no, that's smaller. Sheet of plywood's 32 square feet. So we're not talking about something really big. I wonder your thoughts on it. Or should we just address this in phase two? We are within phase two. We need to do a substantial reorganization of signage to make them content neutral and just clean it all up. So we could just tackle this then.
I'd rather do that.
I think that makes sense.
Okay.
I don't mind
Good.
18 square feet, but let's put it to phase two to do the whole thing at once.
Yeah, I
Makes
agree.
sense.
I don't know why we would increase it, but we can hold off.
Okay. Makes sense to me. Thank you.
Phase two is going to be fun.
This is fun, Fred.
Yeah.
Zoning permits.
Oh, good. Yeah.
All right. A zoning permit and other approvals rendered by the Planning and Zoning Commission shall be valid for 1 year. This is the zoning permit section. So we're talking about zoning permits. So what do we mean by other approvals?
Well, we don't even issue zoning permits
No.
ourselves.
Well,
We
no, I mean, those are
subdivisions
issued
for 5 years.
right. Right. So I think the reference here is other approvals rendered by you. I just don't know what those other approvals would be and why would it be in the zoning permit section, which is where the language was originally.
Oh,
Don't know either.
We clearly issue approvals that are that are good for longer than 1 year.
Right, site plan approval, special use permit, whatever it
Agreed.
may be, yeah.
I mean, I think you should take a close look at this and see if it's, should even be in here. Zoning permits are issued by staff.
Yeah.
I think what this may be saying, and it's not clear because of the language, is it may be saying a zoning permit shall be valid for 1 year and other approvals rendered by the Planning and Zoning Commission shall be valid for 1 year.
Well, that would
Yeah.
certainly help.
Yeah, that makes more
And
sense.
approvals. I think the language is bad, but the question remains, what other approvals are we talking about? It's a blanket statement. It's not applicable to site plan approvals or special use permits.
Does it mean stipulations?
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know either.
I think you're likely better off just striking
I can't see why
everything
it's
from
there. I
Yeah.
can't see-
other to period. To
I think
Great.
the staff, I think I'd like the staff to give us some input on, you know, if we approve something, how long is it valid for? I know a subdivision is valid for a period of 5 years. You know, provided they record it within the, you know, stipulated 90 days.
yeah,
Or within an extension granted by the board. Special permits, I don't think there's any date at all, provided it's recorded. Site plan approvals, I don't think there's any date, but I think the staff should look at this and see if there's, you know, some good that could come from maybe reciting what the validity of the approvals are, if it could be capsized under this, you know, that normally subdivisions are good for 5 years, special permits are indefinite, provided, you know, everybody complies with all the conditions of the statute.
Right.
right.
And if the staff doesn't feel it really says anything, then, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't think it does, you know.
So
I'd rather let the statute speak for this.
yeah. So Keith, you'll see my note in the bottom in blue that Keith thought it should only be applied to zoning permits.
I'd just like to make sure, if Keith said it, I'm sure he checked it out. I would tend to agree.
Yeah.
That everything else is a matter of law. And the zoning permit is really the only local permit that we, everything
Right.
else is covered under the statutes.
Right. Okay. The next part of this is item B, that for whatever reason, and this comes right out of your existing regulations, addresses site plan work. And this is the zoning permit section. Right. So we should probably place this within the site plan section, and assuming that this time frame it is as you understand it should be.
Yep, makes sense.
Move it.
Okay.
That's also true of a subdivision.
Right, which the subdivisions, you as a planning and zoning commission,
The public.
as a combined commission are ruling on that, but that's dictated by your subdivision regulations, not by the zoning regulations, so. Right. Okay. Next. Performance standard language, couple items here. I cleaned up some language. Got rid of the and changed it to an or. If that makes sense. Got rid of the gender specific language to gender neutral language. We already agreed upon striking that sentence that we struck there regarding secret processes.
Mm.
Now what this really comes down to is the fact, which I see as problematic, is that all uses, according to our performance standards section, it says that all uses are subject to these performance standards. Okay. So if all uses are subject to performance standards, when we read that an application for a zoning permit or a certificate of zoning compliance for a use subject to performance standards shall be referred to the Planning and Zoning Commission, that means all applications for all uses should technically be referred to you.
Uh-oh.
All right.
Yeah. I'm good.
We
You
really
know,
don't.
I don't think it would be problematic if we got rid of this whole section, and the reason being is because all uses are going through some sort of permit
Anyway,
process, right?
Anyway, yeah,
And that permit process requires that the uses be compliant with the zoning regulations, and within the zoning regulations are performance standards that are applicable to all uses.
so this is kind of redundant, isn't it? Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
I agree.
I
Okay.
think pull it.
Thank you.
It's confusing.
Yes. Thank you.
First thing we found, right?
Yeah.
Tonight.
We talked about expansions already, and
Mhm.
mostly as related to restaurants. So I don't think this is problematic. Most of my comments were really related to restaurants.
Okay.
So we don't need to do anything here.
Do we need in the definition section a definition of expansions and intensification?
I think it's a good idea, and I've made that note to myself regarding our restaurant discussion to also provide a definition of each. If we do end up referencing intensification, to provide also a definition of that
I think
in
that's a good
addition to
idea.
expansion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
I was thinking of that too, Fred. Yeah.
This one's been on our docket for a while, mostly because we have not yet connected with the review board on to get their opinion on this item. So we should probably keep it in place until we do get an opportunity to discuss this with them, unless anyone has any thoughts to the contrary since then.
Nope.
No.
I think
Okay.
it's
Some way in on it.
touch
Yeah.
base.
I'm keeping it on our list, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Accessory farm structures. This came up with some discussion with Keith, and I don't recall if we talked about it last time, but do we currently call these out separately as an accessory use? And there's what it is right there. So the question is, do we just roll it into the agriculture definition as a whole, which implies that if you're doing agriculture by right, you can engage in any of this without having to go through a separate process to get your accessory use approved. It's just, by right part associated with agricultural use of the land.
I think that's a good idea, so long as they would still have to go through, normal permitting.
Well, there would be building permits.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Agreed.
Agreed.
Does that include windmills?
No.
No.
Well, it depends on the scale. If you're talking about wind turbine for like a wind farm,
No, no.
No. No. If you're talking about the residential scale windmills, yes, it would allow for that, and that would be subject to building permits, which would control their location with respect to fall zone. The height of the structure would still be subject to your zoning regulations, so it couldn't exceed your height limitations.
They're
So there are
pretty
a lot of
strict
controls in place
on the wind turbines. Yes, there are.
yeah, for a farm or residential scale.
We even I looked into it for, yeah, even a 10K one has a lot of parameters you have to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And of course, that includes solar panels, right? Could we have
Right.
a whole
Yep.
thing on that? Okay.
Yep. Correct.
Okay.
Right. Very good. And this is the last of
boy.
these items. I think, Fred, you had a question about this. Is this the right definition? Are we calling this the right thing? What is it? We did revise this. Prior to that, the definition was a dwelling unit in which sleeping accommodations comprised of more than 2 or less than 5 bedrooms.
Yeah.
So we made some small improvements already, but is this what we're talking about? Should we add a stipulation about it only being permitted in a single family dwelling?
Probably, but I'm not sure how this is different from B&Bs
Or
or
short-term
rental,
homes. No, that's what I was wondering.
or
Yeah, well, let me try to explain that. A B&B is a pretty strict business model, right? It's very short term. Usually the stays are a few days, a night, a week, and breakfast is served. That's part of the model. It's versus a boarding house is a person renting out individual bedrooms, right? And so it's not, and generally speaking, that's
An
done
undetermined amount of time also, right?
on a monthly basis, usually a longer period of time, maybe a weekly basis, but usually a monthly basis. It's really about renting out rooms.
Should we say
Um,
that?
And short-term rental is Airbnb, and that's a kind of a different creature itself. That's a little bit somewhere in between the two is what that is.
do we have boarding houses?
You might have them, and that you aren't aware of them.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with tourist home also.
Yeah.
That's an antiquated term, I think.
Yeah.
If you need to make a distinction on the length of stay,
I found this on the web for you if you need to. Check it out.
Not me.
Not me.
Don't look at me. Don't look at me.
Okay.
what am I missing here?
There's Siri or somebody keeps jumping in and adding comments.
Yeah.
I don't think this definition is adequate. Yes, it could be improved.
Okay, so do we go back and try to, as Francisco was talking about, define these different animals as to whether they serve breakfast or not, whether they're
length of stay,
rented for 3 days or a month? Should we even get into that?
Well,
And-
you
and-
already have a definition of bed and breakfast facility, and I'll read it to you now. An owner-occupied private residence in which lodging and breakfast are provided for not more than 8 transient paying guests who shall not utilize more than 4 rooms at any given time. So you have that defined.
And that's
No.
no length of stay is
No
defined.
length of stay. Okay,
Is this a permitted use anywhere in any zone?
It is, you're looking at exactly it. It's, the permitted use is a boarding or tourist home.
So it is a permitted use
It-
in,
Yes, correct, correct.
okay.
so,
Currently, currently permitted, and it's permitted by site plan application in the CS5, LS5, GC60, TC80, MC80, and PV5.
Whoa.
so,
Could
so
we
with-
do this? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Fred.
well, I'm wondering if a small short-term rental would be a boarding house or a tourist home.
Sure
Under
sounds
the-
like it to me.
There's nothing about owner occupied, which was part of the debate we had a month ago. But I'm having trouble seeing a difference.
So why do we even need this?
Is limited. Pardon? I didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah. agreed.
Well, is it the fact that it's 3 or 4 bedrooms versus 1 and 2?
Or 5 or 6.
So
Exactly.
yeah, I think the reason it's not 1 or 2 is because 1 or 2 aren't perceived as a problematic number. If you wanted to rent out a room to a friend who needs a room for a while, or 2 friends, then, let's not worry about that. But if it looks like you're really kind of running a business, which gets you up to the threshold of 3 or 4, then maybe it's something you want to regulate. And you definitely don't want people carving up their houses into 5 or 6 or 7 bedrooms to basically run a small hotel. So I think this is trying to hit that spot in between.
And are there specific regulations around it other than it's allowed in these certain?
You're looking at it.
So does it make sense that we just get rid of it?
You could.
I mean,
what I was wondering.
is there a way to find out if we have one? Because they have to have a special use permit, right? So could we
Or
investigate?
no, it's site plan application approval, not a special use permit.
Okay, so that's probably harder to find out if we have that, right?
So go back for a second. In what zones are these things permitted? Are they in commercial zones only?
No. it
Yes.
was
Yes.
Only commercial, not residential?
No, not residential.
So
Oh.
this is off topic, but how can we have purpose-built short-term rentals of 6 or 8 bedrooms, which you just called a commercial operated, small hotel in residential zones? It's a subject for another day, but it really gets it right into the thick of that whole discussion.
Agreed.
I think it must be likely that when the zoning regulations were originally adopted, that you did in fact have some of these operating. And I think we all understand that boarding homes were something that were far more common 50 to 100 years ago than they are now. And it's very likely that you had some boarding homes existing in those exact zones that I'd mentioned. And the reason that they are currently allowed in those specific zones is because they were there.
Right. Agreed. is an antiquated holdover. Yeah.
Yes. And so the question is, do we want to continue to uphold that, or do we just get rid of this?
Well, short-term rentals and Airbnb has got rid of this for us. In my opinion. They already have.
Well, yeah, yes, yes. And then that,
So why are
that
we
brings up a whole nother issue about, how you want to
police it?
regulate those in the future. And I'm sure there's been plenty of discussion that I've not been privy to surrounding that.
Count your blessings, count your blessings.
Which, I mean, we could tackle that in phase 2. I definitely don't think it's something we want to take on now.
Agreed.
So to that effect, I think we could just get rid of this and no one would notice.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's already been superseded.
Right. Okay, great. The last few, I just kept them in here because, we had organized the buffer regs into tables for the purpose of comparison. And I think given where we're at in this process, I do think this needs quite a bit of work because it's incredibly inconsistent. Buffers and screening are used somewhat interchangeably. They're not poorly defined. And I think there's a lot of work to be done here. And I think it's worthwhile to push this out to phase 2 to really do it properly, rather than just clean up the way we're presenting it within the regs. Let's just take a look at it fresh and craft something that's a little more rational.
Okay.
Okay, good. All right, so that concludes all of the recent revisions to open items. Anyone have any other questions or comments based upon your review this past month?
On page 194, we had,
Okay.
I don't know what the section number was, but
Yeah, I'm going to that now.
the private kennel, I think you had a
Yeah.
highlight.
That's a definition or something, right?
Like,
Yeah. I've got it. That was one of, I had a problem with that too.
okay.
The question being whether, private kennels seem to be allowed in any residential zone, and I can't imagine that in some of the smaller zones, that would be a welcome thing. An RA10 zone, for instance, where you're cheek to jowl and your neighbors are going to have a kennel.
Right.
I'm not so sure that we will get tarred and feathered.
Right. I guess it was a definition, Fred. You're right.
So you currently allow private kennels by special use permit in the GBR 130, RC 120, and RR 80, and that's it.
Oh, okay. So that's separate from the definition and talking about where it's used. Okay.
Well, the definition is what is it? Where it's allowed and by what permit type we handle in the table.
Perfect.
In this case, in section 6.1, the accessory use summary table.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Then my comment is way off base. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
Looking through my long list.
And we're 2 hours and 2 minutes in.
Yep.
I know. Getting tired here. I suggested a few tweaks in language, which we didn't discuss tonight. I assume.
So, Fred, let me stop you there. Ben, could you forward the document I sent to you this afternoon to Fred?
I looked at it. It's basically Fred's comments. I didn't see your comments.
Did you not?
No.
Okay.
Maybe I didn't attach maybe I attached the original version and not my markup.
I didn't see your markup.
So, okay. So
All right.
I'll go back and I'll make sure, I'll forward it to you again, and well, Fred, I'll send directly to you.
Okay.
And I think I have your email address. If not, I'll send to Ben.
Yeah, I can.
I
avoid it.
responded to each one of your comments with a new comment box, okay?
Okay.
Oh, I didn't see that.
So I did review each one of those, and a lot of the okay ones, obviously I didn't need to do anything there, because you're okay as is. Some of the suggested wording changes I did in fact make, fewer rather than less, by example. And then some of the items where I did not make the recommended change, I basically explained why that is. And it's all in the document, so I'll make sure it gets to you.
Yeah, I'd like to see that too.
Okay, very good.
Okay. All right. Then I think we've probably done what we can for one night myself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Getting
Well,
punchy.
let's talk about our next steps.
Yes.
So based upon where we're at in the process and the feedback I received from you this evening, I don't have that much work remaining to make these changes we talked about. A couple of these items do require some investigation, and they definitely require me to come back to you with a proposal as to how to handle them at our April meeting. We also would like to develop some additional graphics, and I think a great example of one needed would be the setback conforming discussion that we had, a graphic to support that, and anything else necessary. So we'll continue to work on that.
Good.
Also, we will develop, and we talked about this last time, a change log, which logs all of the revisions that were made to the existing regulations, all the substantive revisions. It'll also cross-reference the sections, the new section numbers, reference to the old section numbers for help in navigating between the two documents. And we'll note all the definitions that were revised or added. We like to do that at the very end, so that we don't have to change the change log. And we're getting, I think we're close enough now, we can get started on that without having to worry about upsetting the apple cart there.
Good.
I think the next step would be, and we talked about this with Keith last time, would be to share the draft regs with ADRB and ZBA to enable them to provide review and comment, and the change log will be very helpful to them in navigating their way through that.
You, excuse me, Francisco, you'll do that?
Yeah, so I'll work with staff
Okay.
to get
Okay.
that. I'll work with
Good.
Candace
Okay.
or whomever to get that distributed. I
Okay.
think that needs to probably happen after we meet next month and we agree upon some of the final revisions.
Okay.
So I would see that as happening right after our next meeting. And then that puts us in the position, once we have feedback from them, to share the revised regs as required with the COG and with DEEP for coastal review. And we need to allow for their comments, and I'd be very surprised to see anything from either of them that really required us to do any extensive rework.
Well, we won't
It
get them
puts
to
us-
the day before we need them anyway.
Exactly.
So,
Right. And that puts us in the position to hold a public hearing for adoption as early as June.
okay.
Good.
And our next meeting, we're now shifting to Wednesday evenings. So
Right.
it will be April 26th at 7 p.m.
Perfect. And do we have homework?
No, the work's on me now.
Okay.
To the extent that you would like to, revisit the zoning regs and you find anything else that you'd like to call attention to, please feel free. And
Okay.
it's helpful to get that in advance of our meeting, but if you don't get a chance to share it, you want to bring it up at our next meeting, because I don't think our agenda is going to be that deep at our next meeting, where we work through a lot of this. Feel free to bring it up at the April meeting.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Thank you. I guess we'll entertain a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
Thank you, Fred. Do I hear a second?
Second,
Thank you. I heard Ryan in there, I guess. All right. Thank you, Francisco, very much.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I appreciate your contribution tonight.
You're
Thank
a
you.
good leader.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Take
good
care.
All
night.
right. Thanks. Good night,
Bye.
everyone.